Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And once again, we have Aubrey de Grey with us. And for those of you who are here for the first time, you must go and catch up with the two other conversations we've had with him. And one where he talks about his journey, and two where we talk about everything else that he's doing. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about his perspectives on future. In fact, we did have a lot of future perspective conversation even in the past as well. So thank you, Aubrey, once again for making time with us to have this conversation. So, what 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 is the biggest changes that you foresee in the future, coming from where you are, and you've been the biggest voice about aging, but what is the biggest change you foresee in future?
So, actually, I have a slightly, I don't know, contrarian point of view when it comes to predicting the future, in two ways. First of all, I don't like to do it. I think that certainly 50 years in the future, even really 10 years in the future, it's pretty much impossible to predict anything because things change so fast. And of course, things are changing faster now than they ever did. I was probably in my late 20s when the World Wide Web began. And, nobody saw it coming. I had an email address before then, but that was about it. It's ridiculous to try to suppose that things like that are not going to happen fairly soon in the future. And of course, we don't know when. So some things take longer than we think. Self-driving cars are a good example of that, I guess. But it's just like, there's no point in trying to predict the future. The only thing you can really predict is one or two things that are definitely not going to happen. So one thing that's definitely not going to happen that's very relevant to my work is people are never going to start to want to get sick. Right? That's pretty much guaranteed, right? People are always
Right.
going to want to carry on being healthy. And that is the fundamental, the sufficient, justification for my prioritizing the work I do today. The other thing I wanted to mention about the future that again is perhaps a little bit contrarian is I am very opposed to the idea of thinking about particular aspects of the future in isolation. And the reason I am is because people do it all the time and it messes up their conclusions. People especially will think about a post-aging world, for example. They'll think about a world in which we have brought aging under comprehensive medical control. And they will think of all these problems that we're going to have, like, oh dear, well, we put all the people, or they'll say, won't it be only for the rich, or won't dictators live forever, or, doesn't death give meaning to life, and stuff like that. But the worst of it is, like, they'll say things like, how will we pay the pensions? I mean, hello, we've got all this automation coming, which is, of course, is the focus of the work that I did before I was a biologist. And it's pretty much going, I mean, even conservative organizations like the United Nations are saying that most of the jobs that exist today are just not going to exist even by 2050, right? And that's almost certainly over-conservative. And yet, people still think in terms of a world in which we still have this concept of essentially full employment that drives the economy. It's just utter nonsense. So I'm all about if you must insist on thinking about the distant future or even the medium future, you have to think about it in the round. You have to think about everything together and how how the different changes will interact with each other.
Okay, so let's just look at it this way. So, how do you think we should prepare for this fast changing future?
Well, I think the main way to prepare for it is something that is already happening to a significant extent, especially in the West, and perhaps needs to happen more in Asia, especially in the Far East, is to transition the education system, especially the traditional education system, but also adult education, to a system that focuses less on teaching information and more on teaching how to learn, teaching adaptability, if you like.
Right.
Because even today, most of the information, the large majority of the information one learns in high school is completely irrelevant to one's adult life, right? And
Absolutely.
that can become even more true.
So very true. I think information is actually available in public domain and free. So,
Right.
so in that context, that's a very interesting point. You said how to learn instead of how to consume information. Uh, in that context, how do you see the very education, the very basis of education, even globally, is more about recognizing what you have learned versus how you are going to continue to learn,
Well, I mean, I
right?
think
And from a point of certification and the
yeah,
traditional academic process.
yeah. Well, I'm not particularly a fan of the traditional academic process in the first place. But yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, you're absolutely right. The thing about facts is that you either know them or you don't know them, and so people can write exams. Whereas that becomes a little harder. But but in in higher education, that's still true. In you know the hard sciences, you either the exam questions are factual, whereas in the humanities, it's all rather subjective, whether you've written
Right.
a good essay or not. It's perhaps it's already somewhat true. Maybe this is going to be one of those rare cases where the scientific disciplines can actually follow the lead of the humanities rather than the other way around.
But okay, do you really see that happening in future?
I don't know. I'm not an educator. I mean, I'm an
No,
informal educator.
the part of scientific community leading the world and the
The
scientific thinking taking over.
honestly,
Because time and again we keep falling back. What's happening in France or what happened in US a couple of years ago? And
honestly, I don't know. I don't think we will. I mean, I'm not so utopian as to suppose that we will think of a way to make people more rational, if that's what you're asking. Um,
right.
but still, taking the thinking out of the decision making to the extent that it relies on subjectivity. In other words, having more automated and more credible sources of reliable information. That's kind of what we need. People are terribly scared about how, for example, ChatGPT will actually do the opposite. It will actually, make it easier for people to generate distorted information, and to manipulate society.
No, and
Uh,
also the growth of this generative AI is dangerous to humanity. How do you respond to that kind of a thought
yeah,
process? Or
I've been in the middle of that conversation for at least 20 years, and it's gone exactly nowhere. Nobody's figured out any good way to make AI safe. People are at least trying a lot harder to figure out such things now. Now that we've actually got, we're actually on the cusp of it. Whereas perhaps historically people said, they'd worry about it when it happened. Um, but I don't think that's actually delivered any results yet.
no, but today, Elon Musk and a lot of these people have actually gone about getting people to sign. Even the
Yeah,
Google
but
head
I
of
mean,
AI.
well, yeah, that just tells you what I'm saying, right? The best they can think of is, oh dear, let's have a 6 month moratorium. I mean, what the hell use is that going to be? You know,
So, what's your advice to them?
I don't have any. I don't have any. It's a genuinely hard problem.
So, where do you think that's headed then?
Well, I mean, in a sense, we have to. It always helps to look at history, right? So, what happened 50 years ago? We had the Cold War. We had mutually assured destruction that was not very far away, right? Um, It's different this time, but it's similar in some ways. We had to figure out a way to extricate ourselves and to cope as a species with that risk. And, things are not terribly good right now either, but they're a lot better than they were 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Correct.
Um, and, well, at least we hope they are. I mean, they are at the level of the superpowers, at least, whether or not they are at the level of, wider access to seriously dangerous things. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think we pay people to try to be Doctor Evil, try to figure out what can go wrong, and I don't work in that area, so I don't pretend to have any good advice.
Well, but you've been one of the earliest to start working in this. Contribute and think in that process.
So I have the advantage that I work on something. I work in a space that doesn't have that problem. People are incredibly interested in worrying about the problems that the defeat of aging might create. Um, and I do get somewhat frustrated that people don't have a sense of proportion about this. People don't compare these potential problems to the problem we have today that would no longer exist, the problem of aging. But more than that, the thing about aging, if we, to the extent that we make any progress, is that it's only going to change things really slowly. No, we're not going to have any 200-year-old people for at least another 100 years, whatever happens, right? And it's a long, long time to figure out what to do to adapt society accordingly. And really, the only things that we have to worry about, in terms of advances in technology, that we have to worry a lot about, are things that tick three boxes. They have to be things with which a small number of people can do a large amount of damage in a small amount of time. If those three things are not all true, then the technology is basically safe.
Okay, cybersecurity is kind of going that direction anyway, right? That is another thing with AI.
Yeah, AI is absolutely. AI is very much potentially in the
In the
qualifies. Yeah,
yeah,
but aging doesn't. Perhaps that's why I work on
aging
aging.
doesn't. Yeah, aging doesn't. Right. Well, so is there some uh, some advice, if you will, to people who are working on the tech space and health space? Because a lot of these people tend to get into that uh, uh, the God zone, right? So,
Yeah, I don't
and
think I
you've
feel.
been in the AI, you've been in medical, and you continue to be in kind of both the spaces, and these are two things which are bound to have this God phenomenon, if you will. So,
Yeah, well, I have a high opinion of myself too, but the point is, not very many people have that to a problematic extent. It's just that some of the people who do happen to be on television a lot, or they happen to be in the Forbes richest world's richest people. But so what, really? It's not going to change the world. The thing that will change the world is what people are doing. You know, in the actual research arenas. There are dangers from AI that arise from advances in the autonomy, the autonomousness of these systems. So when people say, ChatGPT 4 is, enormously more powerful than 3, but GPT-5 will probably be the thing that writes GPT-6. That's a kind of glib way of saying what people have been worried about for decades, but they've only been worried in a very hypothetical way, and now they're worried in a rather less hypothetical way. But that's as far as I can go. I just don't have enough visibility on what's really going on in the research labs of these companies.
what do you tell them? Because see, they have a bearing on what happens, right? They are the influencers,
Yeah,
and they contribute to some.
I don't have anything to tell them that they don't already know. I mean, I really mean that. These are good people. Let me take an example. Demis Hassabis. He's the guy who runs DeepMind. Now, he and I have been friends for a long, long time, ever since he was an undergraduate at Cambridge. He's probably 7 or 8 years younger than me. So, but we overlapped in the sense that I was still living in Cambridge when he joined the university. So we've known each other ever since then. We haven't seen each other for a few years because we were both too busy. But the point is, this is the kind of guy who, first of all, is just supernaturally smart, but also very humanitarian. He is, and he's one of the most influential and important people in the entire field. And he's not alone. The people who are in this position care about the impact of their technologies on humanity. They want that impact to be positive. So that's the best defense we have.
So, who else do you think are contributing to the future in that sense? In like what you mentioned about him, are there other people you can think of who are? doing things which are going to have an impact in the future?
Well,
I mean,
sure.
apart from yourself, of course.
Well, sure. I mean, everyone always points to Elon Musk, but that's for a damn good reason. He's the kind of person who
Right.
is willing to take huge risks with his own personal finances in order to get things to work. Both Tesla and SpaceX virtually went bust, um, and now he's the world's richest person.
And
But look what
also
he did.
Neuralink, which is in your space.
Hardly. And look what he did last year. He put $100 million into the X Prize Foundation to fund a prize for carbon capture. So here's one of the craziest things about the climate change debate is that a large constituency within the environmentalist community are actively opposed to efforts to remove carbon from the atmosphere by anything other than planting a lot of trees. And the reason they are is because they think that if we talk this stuff up, people will get complacent about reducing carbon emissions. That is the most messed up logic in ever, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And and Elon's having none of it. So he's put $100 million towards making sure that technology to remove carbon from the atmosphere is put in place as soon as possible. Now, that's the kind of thing.
Anybody else? I mean, Elon is obviously one of the prominent front
I
front
mean, yeah,
pagers.
sure. I mean, we can look at all these people. So Jeff Bezos, very different personality to
Yeah.
Elon, but he's put $3 billion into aging research in the form of Altos Labs last year. That's going to be spent fairly well, I think.
Right.
Better than money that Larry and Sergey put in a decade ago, though, and certainly better than the money that Larry Ellison put in 20 years ago. There's plenty of these people. I mean, Peter
See,
Diamandis,
apart from these billionaires who got wealthy and now that they are putting the money, apart from that, anybody in the scientific community you can think of?
well, right. Well, so I mentioned a couple in my own field earlier
Right.
on. Sinclair and Brian Kennedy. There's a half a dozen others I could mention quite easily. But of course, I mean, and I mentioned Demis Hassabis. He's obviously an example of someone who, combined fields. He did his early work in computer science, and then he did a PhD in neurobiology, and then he is combining the two. But then it's not just the scientific people; it's also the people who make things happen. So, I mean, I already just mentioned the X Prize Foundation.
Right.
Peter Diamandis, who runs it, is one of my real role models, one of my real heroes. He,
Okay.
as well as also being a good friend, he is a unique combination of a technological visionary and a spectacular salesperson. Very few people combine those two talents, and he combines them in spades.
Are you able to get him to support your efforts?
Well, watch this space. I can't. There's not. I can't. I can't say too much right now.
Okay, wonderful. And I really hope something on this comes through. And so, in fact, usually this section I like to end with asking for three predictions. And you killed it in the very first thing, saying that you don't like to make predictions. So, is there something you'd like to say that what we
I'll make,
can
I'll
look
make one.
forward to?
Yeah,
Sorry?
I'll make one big prediction, and
Okay.
it's actually not exactly something I'm looking forward to because it's terrifying. What the prediction is that within only a few years, I would say more than 50% chance that it'll happen in less than 5 years, there will be a change in public expectations about the foreseeable defeat of aging. So, as we have spoken about extensively today, at the moment, even in the West, certainly in pretty much the whole world, most people feel like, yeah, there's this talk about maybe bringing aging under medical control, but they'll believe it when they see it because fundamentally aging is, woven into the fabric of the universe, and it's really kind of hard to think of it as a medical problem. That's going to change. And the thing that's terrifying is that when it changes, it's going to change insanely suddenly. I don't know exactly when it's going to change, but when it does, we will go literally in a period of weeks, I believe, from a situation where we more or less all of us believe the kind of thing that more or less all of us believe today, namely what I just said, to a point where more or less everybody believes what I say, right? And the reason it's going to happen so suddenly is because it's going to be driven by a small sequence of events. First of all, there's going to be one or two advances in the laboratory. There will not necessarily be, massive dramatic progress in the grand scheme of things, but they will be sufficiently dramatic to allow my colleagues, people like David Sinclair, people like Brian Kennedy and so on, to go out there and say publicly more or less the kind of things that I already say about the timeframes for future progress. They're already saying things that are a lot more gung-ho than what they were saying even 5 or 10 years ago, but they're still very scared to talk about timeframes. So the reason why this matters so much is what's going to happen after that. As soon as the center of gravity of the expert community in terms of what they publicly say starts to become sharply more optimistic and starts to talk about time frames, which I've always done, but which very much other people are scared of doing even now, then the real opinion formers of the world, Oprah Winfrey, Ellen DeGeneres, people like that, are going to be coming out there saying the same thing. And once that happens, game over. The following day, it will become impossible to get elected unless you have a manifesto commitment to launch a proper war on aging. It's going to be quite turbulent. And as I say, this is going to happen over a very, very short period of time. Literally, I'm not exaggerating when I say it could be a matter of weeks. And I don't know when those weeks are going to be, but I think it's likely that they're going to be within the next 5 years at some point. So that is my prediction.
Wow. Okay. Okay, that is, not too long. So it's quite exciting from that point. All right. Thank you so much, Aubrey, for making time, and hopefully we'll try and get you to Bangalore, also India, at least to talk about not just talk about it, but also perhaps work towards building a community who starts working towards it. Though I'm part of a small effort in that sense, where I'm there more as a mentor for the startups who work in the space. But we can get more people to actively think and work towards this. And wonderful. And to the audience and listeners, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And please spread the word. Go ahead and share it everywhere. And for those of you who have missed the first two parts of our conversation with Aubrey, it's needless to say, you will obviously go and look them up. And do share those conversations also with all your friends and in your network. And for those of you who have not subscribed to Future Past yet, this is the time to do it. And Aubrey, once again, thank you so much for being part of it.
Thank you so much. Great to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Bye for
now.
Bye.